Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about preparations traders need to make for new EU to GB import rules, brought to you by the Institute of Export and International Trade with Digital Trader Services. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Senior Content Editor at the Institute, and I will be your host for this afternoon. And thank you all for joining us today. Given the changing timelines for British import controls, this is clearly a topic of continuing importance, and it's great to see over 400 of you already on the call today and rising. So thank you for joining, and a warm welcome to you all. On the next slide, you'll see here that we've got a lot to cover today and in a slightly different format to normal as well. First, we'll be guided through when the new rules are being introduced, and you'll get a chance to ask questions about this new timeline after. Then later on, we'll look at a new and easier way of completing import declarations with a demo from Digital Trader Services, before a further Q&A about how traders can prepare for new declaration requirements and what Trade with EU may look like in 2022. And as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, you will have the opportunity to scan a QR code at different points of the webinar if you'd like to find out more information about the solutions Digital Trader Services are providing to traders for new declaration requirements. I've also shared a link on the chat room through which you can register your interest in Digital Trader Services. Going to the next slide. Here you can see a little bit more about our speakers today, and you will be sent a PDF office slide pack later on, so you will be able to read more about their illustrious CVs at a later time. But for now, we'll be first hearing from Kevin Shakespeare, the Director of the IOE&IT Academy, about the new timeline for rules. He'll then be joined by Shankar Singham for the first Q&A about these rule changes. Shankar is the CEO of international trade consultancy Computer and a partner at Digital Trader Services. After that Q&A, Mark Crowther and Ian Clark from Fujitsu will be giving a demo of a new Digital Trader Services solution for declarations. And then Shankar will be joined for the final Q&A about the broader landscape of EU trade in 2022 by Mark Johnson, the National Customs and Trade Control Director for Kuhn & Nagel UK. On the next slide, though, before handing over to Kevin, we've got a first poll. And we are asking you, are you aware of when you will need full import declarations from the EU into GB? While you're answering that poll, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Firstly, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window to the right-hand side of your screen. We hope to get to a number of your questions during the Q&As today, though please note that we cannot guarantee we will get to every question in the allocated times. Secondly, as already noted, you will receive access to today's slide pack and a recording of the webinar in a follow-up email we will be sending over the next day or so. So please do try to listen in to today's discussions. I'll give you a few more seconds to answer that poll. Give you a countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm now going to close that poll and share the results. So 62% of you are aware, 14% of you not aware, and a quarter of you not sure. Kevin, at this point, it's my repeated delight to welcome you onto today's panel. Any surprises there in that poll response?
Thank you, Will, and good afternoon, and thank you for the great attendance today. I guess in some ways, if we think about import declarations from the point of view of import customs declarations per se, probably not so many surprises, but what we'll be considering during the course of the webinar today is not just about the import customs declarations, it's the other declarations that are also going to be increasingly important. But again, thank you everybody for completing the poll.
Thanks, Kevin, and yes, thank you everyone for answering that poll. Very much appreciated, of course. Enough of me though, it's now time to hand over to you, Kevin, so over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon again, everybody. So what we're going to be looking at today is the updated timelines, but not just around the actual customs declarations, but everything else that goes with it. And we must be conscious when we move goods across borders that customs is just one part of it, or the customs declaration itself. So if we have a next slide, please. So the headline very much is changes to the timelines are updated from the 14th of September, and changes that were due in October have been put back a little bit. Some to the 1st of January, some to the 1st of July next year. But again, it's not just about the customs piece, it's about the other changes, which we will now refer to in the next slide, please. So when we think about the original timelines announced at the 1st of January 2021, I think one way of looking at it is we've possibly become used on the export side of the new changes and procedures from the 1st of January 2021. But we have other headline dates that are very much now from the 1st of January 2022. So for imports, we see the start of real impact in imports. And the argument is during the course of 2021 that we haven't imported in the same way we import from the rest of the world. So we haven't seen these impacts. And when we think of the volumes from the EU and the actual timings, and we also have to think about when we're importing from the rest of the world, invariably it will involve inventory linked ports and deep sea. And so suddenly we're now talking about short sea crossings. We're seeing a Eurotunnel as well. So we're seeing dramatic changes that will arise, and businesses, hauliers, logistics service providers must be aware of those changes. And we can see terms here like GVMS, Import Safety and Security Declarations, SPS, which we're going to look at in slides coming up. So if we have a next slide, please. So we're going to start by looking at SPS goods, so sanitary and phytosanitary goods. So if we click through, the first one we'll see is pre-notification of agri-food imports. So for example, products of animal origin. And the original start date or the date of the easement period was due to end at the end of September, and now it's going to be at the end of December. So when we talk about full import declarations on the 1st of January, we also have additional impacts for SPS goods. So there is a need to register for IPAFs, a new import pre-notification system in the UK. And you'll see on each of these slides that we have additional columns for you around what logistics service providers need to do. So if you are a trader, for example, you will interface with your logistics service provider. If you are a logistics service provider, you will need to communicate with your trader, and clearly you will have actions for yourself as well. So it's all about the industry working together. Clearly with products of animal origin, you must make sure you're traveling through an official border control post as well. So this concept, which is not just a EU GB concept, import pre-notification is a concept globally that applies, and it's very important that we think about this in the context that that imports from the EU are effectively going to be the same as imports from the rest of the world, but with the additional elements that we have short sea crossings to take into account. So we click through for the next element. So the next element is around export health certificates. And what we must not think is that the easement date has been moved from the 1st of October to the 1st of July, that we have plenty of time, because there will be requirements for export health certificates that are needed. And they will have to move physically with the actual movement itself at a consignment level. So there's a number of factors to consider there with export health certificates. We must also bear in mind with export health certificates that there are different types of export health certificates as well, depending on the actual type of animal product and the actual product being moved. So it's there are some nuances around export health certificates, and it was interesting. I've been on webinars recently with exporters from Malaysia, from Australia, from New Zealand, and they're really struggling to gain the concept of what type of export health certificates are required from the UK. So please bear that in mind as well if you're a trader, that you need to have clear clarity and understanding of the type of export health certificate, because globally there is confusion out there. And we haven't even got to talking around EU suppliers yet. So if we click through the next, we then refer to phytosanitary certificates. And I guess we talk a lot around export health certificates and animal products, but it's very important to note that there is a huge import-export activity in horticulture as well. So flowers, plants, vegetables, and I guess there's the increasing level of trade. So the need for the actual phytosanitary certificate and physical checks also becomes very important as well. Should we click through to the next slide, please? So we've looked at SPS goods. In the next slide, we're going to look at specific customs requirements as well. And again, this is bearing in mind that some of the requirements around safety and security declarations are not just GB, they're not just EU, they all very much stem from the World Customs Organization's SAFE framework around safety and security. So there is this requirement, yes, from the 1st of July, but a very important requirement for safety and security declarations. And what we must bear in mind is that different references are needed for different documentation. So your IPAX reference, for example, will be needed. We'll obviously come on to GVMS shortly. But so what you've got is different declarations, different references, and you've got lots of actors in this trade journey and supply chain. We've looked at it. You possibly could have up to 9 different actors: hauliers, carriers, the importer, the exporter, the freight forwarder, the customs agent, and so on. So everyone has to be talking to each other, and this is what I mean around the fact that we haven't really been importing as such in the full extent in 2021, because all these different actors haven't had to talk to each other, populate various reference numbers. And the entry safety and security declaration is key, and it's very much a global, a World Customs Organization requirement. If we click through to the next requirement, we can see around full customs control and customs checks. So this is the point around customs declarations. But what we must also remember as well is customs checks at the border. We kind of think of customs as customs. We don't always think of it as border force. So we must think very much it's customs and border controls as well. So this actual checks at the border itself from 1st of January 2022, and that is an important milestone, checks at the border. If we have the next slide, please. So, and now we have a GVMS which goes live on the 1st of January 2022. So we got a slide shortly on GVMS, which I'll refer a little bit more to there, but this is an important milestone as well in the movements from EU to GB, through the likes of Dover, through the likes of Eurotunnel, through the likes of Holyhead. Becomes absolutely important, and we can see here another reference is required, the GMR, a goods movement reference. So this is where all these references need to tie up. So there is potential here, if we don't prepare, if we don't consider and reflect correctly, that something could go wrong in the chain. And we think about the number of movements, the short sea crossings, the importance of getting this right. If we have the next slide, please. So GVMS, Goods Vehicle Movement Service. So again, we can see we've referred to the ports, the likes of Dover, Eurotunnel and Holyhead. And it's been introduced to capture details of vehicles and clearly enable faster clearance. And this reflects the fact that clearly some of our ports, for example, facing France, are not inventory linked ports. So we've had to create the GVMS system, and not only the GMR, the goods movement reference, it has to link with the MRN, the movement reference number as well. So there's a lot of contingencies and dependencies in here which we mustn't take for granted. If we have the next slide, please. So what do all these changes mean? Clearly that there is potential for greater delays at the border. It's very potential that importers and exporters connect. You agree your Incoterms. Incoterms become fundamental, and you may prefer simplified frontier declarations. We haven't always thought about simplified frontier declarations, but we must remember we're not talking around deep sea crossings. We're talking about short sea information requirements as well. So simplified frontier declarations could certainly become more important as we go forward. And we've not even discussed today issues around groupage. high-risk food and feed, not of animal origin. And clearly, we've not discussed rules of origin, where there are requirements, especially around supplier declarations, needed from the 1st of January. And we will be looking at rules of origin in a further webinar as well, because it is absolutely essential topic. So the concept of economic national identity is going to become important. And origin, customs declarations, physical inspections, we have to get used to the life where compliance gets you best practice as a business. It gets you competitive advantage in your supply chain and with your customers. But businesses have to comply, have to get ready with all the requirements and rules of origin, as well as classification codes with HS 2022 coming in next year, is going to be absolutely fundamental. Should we go forward? I think we're now open to questions, if I've got this right. And thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
You've got it more than right, Kevin. You're also bang on time, so thank you for that. As you can see there, again, there's the QR code for which you can find out the DTS website. And I say that because we've had a question in about whether we could go into an example of how a goods movement might happen between Calais and Dover. Our last webinar was exactly on that. Kevin did a really extensive case study on that. So have a look on the site to find a recording of that. And there you can also find the next webinar, which is on rules of origin, as Kevin just mentioned. On to the questions though. So Lee has asked, Brexit's already happened. Why is importing going to be different in 2022 from what we know today? Kevin, do you want to answer that one first?
Yes, it's a really good question. It's a very fair question, because we thought, yes, it's all happened from 1st of January 2021. Everything's going to be new and different. But what we must note is the UK introduced a phased border operating model. So whilst in terms of exports, a lot changed, and we mustn't forget things like rules of origin are also very much applicable for GB to EU movements as well, not just on the import side to the UK. But because of these easements, we haven't really had to import in the way that we will have to import. And it's not just about, it is about getting the goods across the border. It's also about post audit as well, post goods coming across the border, where there needs to be that compliance aspect. But it's mainly around the fact that UK introduced this phased border operating model for EU to GB. So we haven't really had to import in the way that we will have to import as goods move cross border, starting from the 1st of January. And I think that's very, very significant and very substantial, is that we can't think that because we're importing a certain way in 2021, it's always going to be like that, because it's not.
Thanks, Kevin. I think that's answered that quite thoroughly. If I can move on to the next question for Shankar. We've had a few people asking this sort of question. One's from Gokhan, who's asked, can we expect longer delays at the border when the easements end? And a follow-up question from Pamela, which is, what do you expect the impact of these changes to be in combination with the ongoing shortage of drivers, containers, and the general global supply chain crisis? So Shankar, over to you on that one.
Well, that's nice, easy questions. I think just to follow up on what Kevin was saying is, it's going to depend on how ready people are to actually do what they need to do at the border. And you've got three systems, as Kevin mentioned, that are coming together on January 1. You've got the need for frontier declarations, the GVMS and IPAPs, and for agricultural products. And it is really important that people fully understand that particularly the frontier declaration piece is going to have to be done. You've got to make sure that you get the requisite MRN because you've done your frontier declaration properly, that generates for the truck a GMR on GVMS, and that will get you through the frontier. But the problem, I think, is going to be that if somebody has not done it properly, if your goods are on a consignment, are on a truck with multiple other consignments where somebody's not done it properly, there's a possibility that the entire truck could be held up, depending on how GVMS is operating on January 1st. So I think the critical thing is understand you're going to have to do frontier declarations. Work with your supplier on your relevant Incoterms, figure out who's got to do what in terms of the responsibility for the declaration, and be ready on January 1 to do it. And just on the poll, it was interesting that if you add up the people who are not sure and the people who don't know about these dates, it's up at 40%, which while it looks like it's good that lots of people know what to do, significantly a lot of people don't either. So really important. Now, the interface with the driver shortage and global supply chain issues, I think this is only going to complicate the process. It is going to take a while for the kinks in the global supply chain to work themselves out, and it's going to take several months at least, and that assumes no further lockdowns. So we don't know how that will work out. There have been some systemic issues arising from COVID and the lockdowns in terms of labour market participation. But the best way to plan for all this is to be ready on January 1 with your Frontier declaration.
Thank you. And just following on from Frontier, because we've had a few people asking about customs freight simplified procedures. Do you think there are real benefits to companies looking at that authorization?
I think there are, and I think what we want to do, and certainly we'll want to do it from the beginning, is think about whether it does make sense for you to split the declaration, so you're taking pressure off the Frontier, because what you don't want to have is obviously the truck stopped at Calais, and you can avoid that to some extent by having a simplified Frontier declaration using your CFSP, using a CFSP authorization, which has been made easier by HMRC, so for people to get. So I think it is certainly something that you should explore, whether that makes sense. It's not always the case that, people have a tendency to think, well, full Frontier is one declaration, so why wouldn't I do that? The problem is that it's got to be right. Otherwise, you're going to have, no MRN, no GMR, truck stopped.
Kevin, you've advocated customs special procedures much before. I mean, is that something you'd echo?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I guess in the UK, we probably, unless you're a big business, haven't really thought about the benefits of custom special procedures. And clearly, the position on trade has changed with the European Union. The introduction of tariffs, rules of origin, the likes of inward processing, customs warehousing are certainly becoming a lot more popular now. But so is CFSP, and the HMRC last year introduced simplifications around the CFSP application process. So it is something for businesses to consider, because as we've indicated, a lot of systems have to talk to each other. Different actors in the supply chain have to talk to each other as well. So there is more propensity. So use of simplified declarations. And when we say simplified declarations, we mean simplified declaration sets or simplified data sets. So yes, it certainly could be very important to how we do business.
I suppose the thing to remember as well is that the simplified declarations they're not a cutting short of all the data fields. You just have to do the remainder of them at a later time for the supplementary declaration. Excellent. While we answer a couple more questions, I'm just going to put up our next poll. And this is asking how prepared you think you are for the rule changes, or for completing declarations more accurately, from 1 January 2022. And there's a sliding scale from very prepared to not at all prepared. While people are answering that one, so Kevin, I've had a question through from David, who's asked, how do you identify which ports your goods need to move through, as in which model they might be adopting under the border operating model?
Yeah, so there is a list available which we can make of those ports, or most of the ports who have identified the GVMS model. So today, for example, we've referred to Dover, Eurotunnel and Holyhead, for example. But it is worth checking that list, and we can certainly make the list to the extent it's available there. I think in terms of obviously working on supply chains and logistics, it probably depends which part of the UK you are, and which part of the EU the supplier is based in as well. But there are clearly a number of factors to consider. in that context. And as we know, freight costs are quite have been high currently. So it really is about, again, an educated, very much working with your freight forwarder to determine the best route and taking into account routes where you are based, where your supplier is based, but also to have a big shout out here in terms of transit possibly as well, depending which EU country the goods are coming from. That can be actually very important in terms of using transit procedures if it's for example coming from Spain and going through France, just using that as an example.
Thanks, Kevin. And one last question for Shankar at this stage. It's from Madeline, and a few people have been asking it. It's around GVMS, and I think it's a really important clarification. So Madeline asks, is it the exporter or the haulier who's using GVMS?
So the haulier will have to, and I'm glad that question was asked actually, because it is the responsibility of the haulier. And I think if we ask that poll question at the front of, at the beginning of the presentation, if we ask that in Europe, we might get very different results. So to the extent that you're working with hauliers in Europe, in member states in Europe, or to the extent that you're working with your suppliers in Europe, it's really important to explain to them, you know, what these deadlines are, because I think the level of understanding and the level of knowledge about what is required is much less in Europe. Now, the government is doing a campaign to reach out to different European member states and to reach particularly the European hauliers, but it is yeah, very, very important to get that message out.
Thanks, Shankar. I'll put my teeth back in. So I'm going to close that poll now and share the results. So interestingly, it's over half of you say you're prepared, 45% quite prepared, 13% very prepared, but around the same number as people said they were less aware of the rule changes are saying that they're not prepared or not sure. So that's roughly about 41% between the three options there. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time to reflect on that poll now, but thank you, Kevin and Shankar, for those answers and the presentation just now. At this stage, on the next slide, I'd like to bring on Mark Crowther and Ian Clark from Fujitsu and Digital Trader Services, who'll be giving a quick demo on a new solution for completing declarations. I'd like to bring on Mark first. Hi, Mark. Welcome aboard. Great to have you with us. Afternoon indeed, yes. While I'll give Ian the screen for the demo, could you say a few words about Digital Trader Services and why it's such an exciting solution for traders?
Yeah, I think I'll start on a more pessimistic note, actually. Apologies, but I think the truth is, and it's a testament to how many people are attending not only this session, but a great number of these at the moment, which is this is an extremely changing landscape that we face ahead of us, and it's probably the biggest differences in how we operate day to day in our businesses, whether that's as a trader or a haulier, freight forwarder, or any type of LSP, and it's going to affect every single person all the way through those companies. And actually, I think the truth is that whilst we think we're in a position to offer a great deal of support and help to trade and customers in the UK generally, I don't think, if you'd asked us years ago if we wanted to be in this position, I'm not entirely sure we'd have all said that. Certainly not the way it's being handled. But as the same similar consortium before with TSS and now with Digital Trader Services, we want to enable this country to thrive and achieving what it possibly can, and more importantly, actually looking out to every individual, whether you're a small trader all the way up to one of the largest LSPs there might be. We are trying to put ourselves in a position that we can offer the support to everybody. And it's obviously a great pleasure to work with the IOE on that, and Fujitsu and so on. Now, you don't have much of my time today, which is probably a great relief to a number of you. But the best way of describing this is handing over to somebody far more qualified than I, which is Ian, who's going to take you just through a snippet of what Digital Trader Services looks like and how we can help submit declarations. I think we're looking at the supplementary declarations today. And my personal email address will be on afterwards. So if anybody does have any questions that they don't get on here, please reach out. I can't promise I'll get back to everybody in the day, but we want to encourage as much conversation and support as possible, and I think that's reflected in what you're about to be seeing.
Okay, thank you, Mark, and thank you for the build up there. So what you can see on the screen is I'm logged on to our demo system here. I'm signed up to use the service. I've logged in. I can access a few things from this home screen, so I can access some of the other services which are available. I can access further information. If I'm stuck with a particular problem, I can contact, and I can see a couple of ways of contacting the DTS service centre. So they're there to help with obviously technical queries if you have a problem with a submission, but also customs queries. So one of the strengths in the consortium that we have is that depth of customs knowledge and the fact that we can help you through some of these processes. But what we're going to do today, and as Mark said, we're going to use the delayed supplementary declaration that you saw on one of the earlier slides as an example of some of our thinking that goes into the way we've designed the digital trader services solution. So I can see a list here of the declarations that I've previously made. This is our demo system, so it's not connected to customs. So nothing ever goes further than submitting. But it shows you the approach that we're taking. So I'm going to make a new declaration. What this does, first of all, is there are a couple of screens which ask me some questions that make sure I'm prepared and ready to make my declaration. So this first one is all about having the right information that I need. So have I got all the information to hand to enter into the system? And what you'll see from that list is we want to ask a set of questions which are really business questions. So the sort of question, sort of things you might expect if you've ever seen a commercial invoice. You've got a vast majority of the information that we'll need. So I'll just click that I'm ready here. Then ask me a slightly different set of questions, which is all around the supplementary declarations. And again, just wanted to sort of highlight a couple of things here with the way we ask these questions. So for example, this third one here about goods entering Great Britain into free circulation or for home use. Those of you familiar with customs procedure codes will be able to tell me the procedure code that relates to. But what we're actually doing is we want to ask a question in plain English, and then we'll do the translation to customs in the background. You can see a couple of examples of that in what we're doing here. So, and the other thing you'll see all through the screens that I'll go through, you'll see these little tooltips, these little information buttons, and if you hover over those, it gives you a little bit more background as to what we're doing. So we'll then move into the declaration itself. It remembers from the last one I did that the invoice was in sterling, so I can just carry on from there. And then when the screen loads here, you'll see along the left-hand side, these are the set of screens that we're going to run through. And what it will do, and again, sort of following that theme of making it easy to use, I can enter details in here of the organisations that I'm my supplier. So I can type in all those details. But once I've done that once, it remembers that for me. So I'll pick one that I did before. This is an import declaration, so I don't need to know the IORI number of my supplier. I can add it in here if I wish, or I can just click that I don't know the IORI number. So I can then move on from that screen, and then we're into details of the shipment. So when the goods moved. And if I just click through those, you can enter those details, or you can type them in. Let's have some goods that arrived. Roll on, roll off. Our supplier was in France, so I can just select that from the drop down. Similarly, we'll select the point of entry, and if I just hit the first letter of what I'm what I want. I'm going to go for Dover Eurotunnel. And again, similarly, it asks me for that commercial invoice reference. So that's the reference. I'm sure those of you familiar with customs that HMRC want to see where the valuation of the goods came from, where those details of the goods came from. Again, I can enter that, but because I'm lazy, I'll just pick one from that my browser has helpfully remembered for me. And in fact, while I'm just show you a little bit more of the screen while I'm doing that, let me just get rid of that top button so you can just see a little bit more of the screen and less of my browser bar. So in this instance, I can add my own unique reference number should I choose to. So that might be something that brings it back to my records. So it might be in whatever format I choose. I can add my reference in here. I need to add details of the country that shipped the goods, the haulier that actually moved the goods. Let's stick with France. And then the last question on this page is around additional transport insurance or other costs that I might have paid. I'm going to say no to that for this example. But if there were an example of additional charges, then they can be captured here. And again, we use that to determine some of the items that customs use for valuation for duty purposes, but also for things like deriving the Incoterms, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So we'll move on to entering details of the goods on the next screen. My broadband has been playing up this morning, which of course only ever happens when you're doing a demo. But if you can bear with me just a second, we'll hopefully get that loaded. There we go. So again, I then start to get asked some questions about country of origin of the goods. So if all the goods originated from the same country, I can just answer yes. I can pick from the drop-down list again. I'll stay consistent and say that these goods were not only sent to me from France, my suppliers in France, but they're goods of French origin as well. And I can then add the line items for my declaration, or the line items for my invoice, which is what I'm working from. So this is the most customs it becomes, and that's asking for the commodity code. So again, the good news is with modern browsers is they remember some of those for you. So here's one I used a little bit earlier on. I need to add a description of those goods. We'll keep it topical, and I'll stick with face masks. And then I just need to add some details, quantity of those goods, the net weight. Again, the sort of information you'd expect to see on a commercial invoice, and also to that those of you used to making declarations will also be used to seeing. So once I've entered that data, I can hit confirm up here. What that's doing in the background is going away to the HMRC tariff. So you can go and look at the tariff online, navigate through to find commodity codes and the controls that apply to those commodity codes. But what the system's doing here is saying we've put in that particular commodity code. I happened to pick one that was face masks. So those items are COVID critical. So I'm just going to select they are COVID critical. And again, what that's doing is asking a plain English question, and then deriving the additional code for customs in the background. So you don't have to go and look up what that code is. So I finished there. I can hit add. And then what that will do is add the items into my list here. I can add multiple items as I if I need to, but I won't subject you to my typing for much longer. So I just need to confirm the number of of packages that were in the shipment, and again, that's that screen done. I get a confirmation screen which has worked out the total value against the invoice, so I can just check that back with the actual invoice I've got, just make sure that's correct, and if everything's correct there, I can hit next, and I get my final screen. And what that does across the sections, as you can see here, supplier, shipment, goods, etc. Across those sections, it shows whether I've completed them correctly. It would show me if there was an error. If there was an error, I could just either select this and select the link here, or navigate through these links, go back, correct what I've done. I might only have some of the information the first time I go through this, so I could go through, save it as a draft, and then wait, come back when I've got the rest of the information. But as you can see here, I've got everything I need. So I'm just going to hit finish. I get a notification. Chance would be a fine thing to sit back and relax, but hopefully you get what we're meaning there, in that so DTS will now process that declaration, and then if I return to the home screen, I can see that the declaration that I've made here, and I can see the fact that that's in the process of being submitted to customs.
That's great, thank you, Ian. That's really interesting to see how the Digital Trader Services solution in action and how it could be useful to businesses. So thank you once again. I'm just going to take back the screen. So I'm going to do that now. And as I do that, on the next slide, when it comes up, you will see how you can contact Mark for more information about the solution. Just while the slide is up on the screen, we've had a couple more questions about Digital Trader Services. Rosie has asked, does the DTS service have other functionality or features beyond declaration submission? Ian, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, happy to take that. So so the answer is yes. What we're in the process of doing next and launching very, very soon, within the next week, is a service aimed at freight forwarders and their hauliers. So obviously a lot of this presentation today has been with regard to the need for frontier declarations for GB EU movements from the 1st of January. So that will allow, in the first instance, import declarations, full frontier import declarations to be made. There was also a mention a little bit earlier on of GVMS, and again, one of the things we will add on to that service certainly before January, but it's as quickly as it needs to be available, is the ability to take the data from the declaration, because I'm sure, as many of you know, there's a lot of data in a declaration, and especially once a declaration is submitted, the movement reference number, which is needed for the GVMS entry. So we'll ask a couple of additional questions, but we'll use the data that has already been provided on the platform to not only submit the customs declaration, but also the GVMS entry, and we'll apply that same sort of thinking when we get to the entry summary, safety and security declarations as well. And I hope Mark doesn't mind me saying so, but one of the other things we'll do, if there are particular requirements where you think, well, we'd really like to use Digital Trader Services, but it doesn't quite do X yet, or does it do Y? Then we'd be more than happy to have a conversation about that. Within the consortium of companies that we're working with, there is a customs agent within what we're doing, which is making sure we're compliant, making sure that we're dealing with the more complex queries. So one way or another, we can handle any type of declaration.
Thanks, Ian. Before we move on to the final Q&A, and my outro won't take 5 minutes, so we'll have plenty of time for that. I'd just like to give you a further opportunity to opt in for further information about the Digital Trader Services. It's going to put that poll on the screen for a few seconds. There's another opportunity to opt in for more information. While I give people a few seconds to answer that question, one last one for you, Mark, is from Shannon, who's asking if you could advise around the cost of DTS.
Yes, inevitably. Yeah, look, it varies. I think that's the truth of the matter. We want to serve everybody, and this is a pretty powerful piece of kit, but we also don't want it to be exclusive from anybody. So we know that people trade at different times of year. It could be seasonal. It could be that people aren't making that many declarations. There's all sorts of reasons, but just a snapshot. So if you want, we've got a pay-as-you-go system, which is for, if you're not doing that many declarations, if you're trading, not doing that many per month, and there's no subscription fee for that. It's just and no obligation of contract or anything. It's just £45 per declaration, and you still get the IOE support and all of our support that comes with that. And then if you're right at the other end of the scale, there's the cost of declarations comes down to about 20-something pounds. But obviously all of these things are scalable, as you can imagine. Ultimately, the truth of the matter is we also don't want to tie people in. So one of the more important things on all this is actually the support and expertise that you get. This isn't just a portal, a piece of software. This is a consortium where we're using the IOE, we're using our experts, we're using the same customs experts that helped with TSS to be on the end of a phone for those that need it. And so there's no bolt-ons and there's no contracts longer than 3 months either. So this is a service here to try and support this economy, not to try and make a quick buck. And I think that's a pretty important message to put out there. But obviously, my details on the screen, you'll get those. Please feel free to reach out, and I'll speak to everybody individually where I can.
Thanks, Mark. I'll just give people a few more seconds to answer that part. We actually had a couple of people asking whether there are similarities with a trader support service. So that's good you covered that as well. But yeah, really interesting to see how digital trader services works, and we hope you can all see how it can help importers with your declaration requirements. So thank you, Ian and Mark, for the time today. Really useful demo. I will now close that poll, and if we can move on to the next slide, please. We are now on to the final part of the webinar. So it's another Q&A, and I'm delighted to welcome back Shankar Singham. And for the first time, I'm going to say hello to Mark Johnson from Kuehne + Nagel. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, obviously, I'll start with Mark. Obviously, you're able to provide a slightly different perspective to our other speakers today with Kuehne + Nagel very much at the front line when it comes to UK-EU trade. I'm just wondering what preparations you've been making for the start of next year and what advice you are giving to your customers.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I appreciate the opportunity. Obviously, I'm slightly representing a different area on the panel because I am your lead service logistics service provider, I guess. So, and as Kuehne + Nagel, a global organisation, you won't be surprised that we've been doing a lot around preparation for 2022. So the real challenge is, of course, come January 2022, there are only two options. That is either the pre-lodgement model or the 90-day temporary storage model. Well, the 90-day temporary storage model works at some ports, but doesn't work through the main port that we bring goods into from the EU, which of course is the Kent corridor, so Dover and Folkestone. So really, unless you're bringing your goods into an inland temporary storage depot, you're really limited to your options of a pre-lodgement model through the Kent corridor. And that's the way that we are going. 90% of the goods that come to the EU come through that corridor, and actually 80% of the business that we move from Europe to the UK also comes through that corridor. So we've really focused on that pre-lodgement model. And this isn't the platform, but Kuehne + Nagel as an organisation also has the technical solution that gathers the export data when the shipment's booked, produces the export declaration, transfers that over to the importer record. Importer record adds that detail, submits it, and it submits an import declaration to customs. What we've worked on in developing that technical solution is also similar to Digital Trader. It is connected to GVMS, and also we've done the connection through to provide the import safety and security declaration. So that data set will also get pre-populated when we get to July next year. So what we are doing now is intensifying, doing very similar webinars to this with our customers. What we're really telling our customers to do is this is a different relationship you need now from January with your European supplier. Your European supplier needs to know information about your product, classification goods, they need your GB or ORI number. You need to start to work so that actually when you have an order placed and you want to book a shipment moving from Europe to the UK, you need to prepare everything before Kuehne+Nagel comes along and picks it up. So we are only wanting to pick up goods that have got the export declaration done and the pre-lodgement declaration done before we pick it up. That way, it'll go into our warehouse. We load the vehicle when it's under our control. Obviously, we load the vehicle, all the shipments get put on the trailer. We'll have created the goods movement reference number within GVMS. We add the import declaration numbers, we close the door, we give the driver the GMR, he turns up at Calais or Coquel, presents the GMR, hopefully all complete, gets on the boat, all of the declarations become arrived as they cross the border, duty and tax is accounted for, and providing no other intervention when he arrives in the UK through normal government bodies that might want to see, he then goes off and delivers. So we're aiming to try and keep the service as easy as possible without, but bearing in mind all of the changes that are coming as from January, yeah. So a long answer for a short question, I guess.
Thanks, Mark. No, it was really, really interesting to hear all of that. We've had a few people asking around that poll we asked earlier, which is the preparedness of businesses. And it'd be interesting to hear both of your thoughts on this. You've both been engaging with government throughout this whole Brexit process. I mean, what do you think the expectation is of trader readiness for the rule changes going into 2022? Feels weird saying that. Shanker, what's your take?
Well, I think the challenge that government has here is, if you look at the history, quite often when easements get extended out, people simply don't get ready. I think it's really important to understand there's some very important reasons why the Frontier Declaration has to go in. And don't assume that just because it's been delayed, it's going to get delayed again. You know, as long as you have the current easement on the border, you don't really have a fully secure border, and obviously Home Office and Border Force will have something to say about that, and it can't be delayed. You know, it really can't be delayed. You also have put your other trading partners with whom we're negotiating deals. You know, we've got Australia, New Zealand, etc. Ongoing negotiations with other people. You're putting the EU exporter on a different footing, or people who are importing from the EU on a different footing from the rest of the world, and that's not really sustainable either for very, very long. So I think the history sort of suggests to us that if you actually impose the requirement, but maybe use a period of time where the other government systems that are connected into this are perhaps, you know, what you might say that they sort of have training wheels a little bit. That's the better way for getting traders to fulfill these obligations. So, for example, IPAS, which is the SPS rule, there's a sort of phase one of IPAS where if you don't put in the totally accurate rules of origin, etc., you won't get kicked out for a period of time to get people used to those systems, and I think that's what we'll see. But it was interesting that the poll, you know, the numbers were very similar from the first poll and the second poll in terms of who was sort of the whole category of people who were not prepared for this. Which is still quite a high category, and that's a UK poll. And most of the people, I presume, on this seminar are UK based. And I just like to underscore what Mark said about getting your European supplier to understand what these requirements are. Getting if you're using a European order, getting them to understand what these requirements are. I suspect, again, if you did the same poll in the EU, your percentages of not being aware will be much higher. So it's really incumbent on all of us in the supply chain to make sure that the people understand what these obligations are.
Mark, do you have anything to add to that? There's quite a lot said already in the two answers, but anything more?
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I would only reiterate what Sheng is saying. I think, you know, from a personal point of view and our customer engagement, it seems like a lot of effort and resource and time has been put in this year just to manage the easement that the government very kindly put in. But when you're trying to, when you're submitting declarations from sort of the first 3 months of the year, 6 months later, I think a lot of organisations have found that quite challenging, and I think their focus has been on that. I think I'm not surprised at the figures at all. I think it's the same in Europe. It would be considerably higher. I think the government's own statistics on the number of people who are actually registering for GVMS, I think it was only a month ago, and they are expecting 10,000 people, 10,000 organisations registering on GVMS. I think it was only a month or 6 weeks ago they only had 600. You know, I mean, that's and these are European hauliers, because at the end of the day, it's the active move of transport that's got to be responsible for GVMS. Now, we as even if we subcontract it to another haulier, a shipment, maybe a full load, a half a load that we can't cover, we still have the responsibility, if it's our goods, to give that detail to that haulier, but it's the haulier that's got to submit the GVMS. So, I mean, the relationship between all of the parties, and I think it was said by Kevin, in the supply chain has got to be at a different level now come January 2022. We have all got to work together to make this happen.
Those GVMS figures are slightly worrying, aren't they? It kind of points to another Christmas dash, as it were. And of course, this all comes against a backdrop of continued supply chain crises, and it's been a difficult period for global shipping as well. I mean, Helena's asked a question: what is the outlook for 2022 when it comes to these crises, and particularly on shipping? She was asking. And Mark, do you want to start on that one? Oh, sorry, Shanko, if you want.
I'll just make one comment on that before we get Mark's thoughts. But I think one of the problems is that with the lockdown, you've got a lot of big ships, you know, the big container ships being decommissioned. They don't get recommissioned, you know, they don't get rebuilt that quickly. You've also got a lot of big ships that are, you know, they're all in the wrong places. The goods are in the wrong places from the perspective of the supply chain. That's why you've got like 80 big ships outside the port of Long Beach in California. So this is not something that snaps back in a sudden way the moment, you know, we get consumer demand sort of up again. Added to that, you've got inflationary pressure. I mean, we've seen some numbers today about what inflation's going to look like. That's going to create some pressure on the interest rate. So I think, you know, the bottom line is I think we're entering a world that is quite different from the one we've been all, you know, perhaps familiar with in the last 20 plus years, where we've lived in a world really for quite a long time with either low or no inflation and low or no interest rates, and that world I think is changing. And so I think what it means for people is there's going to be a greater emphasis on anything you can do to make yourself more productive and lower your costs. This is going to be absolutely critical. We didn't care so much about that when inflation was zero and price competition was not particularly, you know, massively important, but it's going to become important, you know, going forward.
And Mark, obviously, you're very close to this industry. Kind of how are you seeing 2022 shaping up?
Yeah, I mean, we've gone through a unique set of circumstances that have just created a whole different world. And whilst I don't think it will be as intense as this year, I don't think, you know, next year will be settled to a degree, but nowhere near where we were before. I mean, just a couple of examples. I mean, obviously, anyone who's in the process of trying to buy a new car, you know, the chips that go in the new car, you know, why they're not available? Well, we had COVID and production was all being ceased all around the world. You know, it was a challenge. when you look at a container, as Schenker's mentioned, arriving at the UK port prior to COVID, it would be 24 hours to offload a 20,000 TEU container. Now, because of COVID and the cleaning regime that they have to have between cranes, it now takes 5 days. All of a sudden, everything is that much more difficult to do and adds cost into the supply chain. When it adds cost into the supply chain, it generates inflation, and we all end up paying more. So I think at the end of the day, I think it will settle, but it's not going to be much less than the norm of this year, to be honest with you. But I think into 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, and just
Thank you.
just a word on the cost increases. I mean, you're talking about container from China to Europe going from 3,000 to $20,000. So 6-7-fold increase in cost. These are massive costs in the supply chain. So it's going to take a long time to.
And those cost increases are all around the movement of containers. So obviously the idea is no different than a plane. A shipping line wants to keep that container moving all the time, full as much as it can. And if everything slows down, then it's availability versus demand.
Thank you both. I mean, it's a conversation I think we could keep on going for another 15, 20, maybe even an hour. It's such an interesting topic, but we do have a couple more questions I want to get through quickly, and a poll which I've just put up on the screen asking you what help you'd like most to prepare for completing declarations. I'll let you read the options there. So just a couple more questions on DTS which have come through for Shanker. Sam has asked, how is digital trader services different to other customs declaration programs?
Yeah, so I think there are two principal issues here, or two principal unique selling points here with DTS. I mean, one, as you've seen from the demo, is the work that's gone into having a sort of irreducible set of questions in terms of simplicity. That you're really moving away from almost having to be a customs specialist in order to do a customs declaration. The real focus of DTS is how do you get, for example, a small trader to be able to do a customs declaration. They don't want to be asked complex questions with customs language in them. So we've got that question set down to as easy as possible a way for people to do it, where there's a lot of work that goes on under the bonnet, as it were. And I think the second area is the support that we have in terms of, there's always a human element, so it can't all be digitized completely. And that human element of support for complex customs questions, and the use of both the resources of the Institute of Exports who are supporting DTS in that area, but also other specialists. And DTS has a think tank of very, very experienced international trade customs people who can address even the most complex questions. So it's a sort of one-stop shop for all of that, and I think that is that's what makes it stand out at the moment.
And I think that's sort of reflected in the response to that poll. I mean, people want support from human beings. They want support to learn the skills. They also want the declaration automation element of it. It's a real mix in the response there. If I can do one last question, Shanker, if you've got time. This is from Colin, who's asked, can we use digital trader services if goods are imported through a fast parcel operator? A few people have asked it, so I thought I'd put this on forward.
Well, you can, and it depends on specifically where you're talking about. So if you're talking about GB&I, if it's an all-Ireland issue, then there is an easement on fast parcel operators, and there's no customs process. If you're talking about EU into GB, that's a different case where there isn't an easement in place. But typically, if you look at what fast parcel operators do, they'll have a model where they will essentially be doing the customs process for the person. So the importer or the person who's receiving the package, has a much easier time. Now, some of these processes and some of these things that people have typically done are changing. So it's important that you understand the terms of trade that apply here. But yes, in principle, we can do that.
Great, thank you, Shankar, and thank you as well to Mark, as we're going to need to bring today's session to a close now, as we have run out of time. So thank you once again to Kevin, Shankar, both Marks and Ian for your answers and time today. I hope everyone has found this session really useful. And thank you everyone for your questions and for the poll responses too. We'll try to see how we can get back to some of those questions afterwards. Just a reminder that we will be sending a recording to all registrants of today's webinar, along with a copy of the slides that will come before the end of the week. So please do get in touch if for any reason this email doesn't come through to your main inbox. But for now, thank you everyone for joining. Please do let us know your thoughts in the exit survey. And yeah, great chatting again, and see you on the next one. Thanks everyone. Bye.